There is a flower that refuses to bloom until the world breaks it open. And there is something inside you doing the exact same thing. You know that feeling, the one you can't quite name? It sits in your chest, not heavy enough to call pain, not sharp enough to call a wound. Just there, like a word stuck on the tip of your tongue, like a scream trapped behind a smile. You've been carrying something, maybe for months, maybe for years, maybe for so long that you've forgotten what you felt like without it. And the strangest part? You've gotten good at it, good at pushing it down, good at changing the subject inside your own mind, good at saying, "I'm fine," so convincingly that even you believe it. But here's what nobody tells you about the things you bury. They don't disappear. They germinate. This is the black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia hirta, a wildflower native to North America. And at first glance, she looks like pure sunshine, golden petals radiating outward like a small, joyful explosion frozen in time. But look closer. Look at the center. It's dark, dense, almost black, like a pupil staring back at you, like an eye that has seen something it will never forget. Bright beauty surrounding a dark core. And that contrast, that tension between the gold and the shadow, that's not an accident. That's her story. Because the black-eyed Susan does something extraordinary, something that most people never learn about her. She doesn't bloom in comfort. She blooms under pressure. She thrives in poor soil, in drought, in the margins, roadsides, abandoned lots, forgotten edges of highways where no gardener ever planted a seed. The worse the conditions, the more fiercely she blooms. As if something inside her says, "You will not ignore me." Not anymore. Now, let's talk about you. Not the version of you that shows up to work on Monday morning. Not the version that laughs at the right moments and nods at the right times and holds it all together so beautifully that no one ever thinks to ask, "Are you okay?" No, are you really okay? Let's talk about the version underneath. The one that remembers. In psychology, there's a concept called emotional suppression. And it's exactly what it sounds like, the act of consciously or unconsciously pushing emotions down, out of awareness, away from the surface. And we all do it. We do it because the world taught us to. Be strong. Don't let them see you struggle. Other people have it worse. You're too sensitive. These phrases, they sound like advice, but they function like shovels. They teach us to dig holes inside ourselves. And every emotion we're told is too much, too messy, too inconvenient. We drop it in. We cover it up. We plant grass over it and pretend the ground is flat. But Dr. James Pennybaker, a psychologist at the University of Texas, spent decades studying what happens to the body and mind when emotions are chronically suppressed. And what he found was remarkable and disturbing. Suppressed emotions don't weaken over time. They compound. They create a kind of internal pressure, psychological, physiological, neurological, that builds quietly, invisibly, the way tectonic plates shift beneath a city that believes it's standing on solid ground. The body keeps the score. That's not just a book title. It's a biological fact. Unexpressed grief becomes chronic tension in your shoulders. Swallowed anger becomes a jaw you clench in your sleep. Unprocessed sadness becomes a fatigue that no amount of coffee or sleep can touch. And here's the part that sounds almost poetic because it is. The emotion doesn't die when you bury it. You bury it alive. Let's go back underground. A black-eyed Susan seed can lie dormant in soil for years. Some studies suggest up to decades. Just waiting. Silent. Still. Invisible to the world above. But is not dead. Inside that tiny seed, the genetic code for a full, blazing, golden flower is folded, perfectly preserved. Waiting not for comfort. Not for perfect conditions. Waiting for disruption. Ecologists call this fire-adapted germination. After a wildfire clears the landscape, after everything above ground is destroyed, the black-eyed Susan activates. The heat cracks the seed coat. The ash enriches the soil. The absence of competing plants lets sunlight reach the ground for the first time in years. And she rises, not despite the destruction, because of it. I think about this sometimes. When I meet people who are going through the worst seasons of their lives, when I hear someone say, "I don't know why everything is falling apart," and I want to say, gently, carefully, because I know how it sounds, Maybe nothing is falling apart. Maybe the fire is clearing the ground. Maybe something that's been buried for a very long time is finally finding its way to the surface. Because that's what suppressed emotions eventually do. They bloom, whether you're ready or not. The panic attack that comes out of nowhere on an ordinary Tuesday. The tears that fall during a song you haven't heard in years. The sudden rage at something small, a dropped glass, a misplaced key, and, deep down that you're not angry about the glass. You were never angry about the glass. These are not breakdowns. These are breakthroughs. These are seeds that have been underground too long, and they are done waiting. So what do we do with this? If our buried emotions are seeds, if they're going to bloom no matter what, then the question isn't whether they'll surface. The question is, will you be the gardener or the bystander? Because there is a difference between emotions that erupt chaotically, destructively, at the worst possible moment, and emotions that are allowed to emerge gently, deliberately, in their own time, but with your awareness. And nature, as she always does, shows us how. In Japan, they practice something called Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. It's not exercise. It's not hiking. It's simply being in the presence of trees, breathing the air they breathe, letting the forest hold space for whatever is inside you. And the research on this is staggering. Studies from Chiba University found that just 15 minutes in a forest environment significantly reduces cortisol, the stress hormone that skyrockets when we suppress emotions. Blood pressure drops. Heart rate variability improves. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that overthinks, overanalyzes, overcontrols, begins to quiet. And something else happens. Something harder to measure, but impossible to miss. People start to feel. Not because the forest forces them to, but because nature does something that modern life almost never does. It gives you permission. Permission to be still. Permission to not perform. Permission to let whatever is buried rise, without judgment, without a deadline, without someone telling you to get over it. The trees don't ask why you're crying. The river doesn't tell you to calm down. The wind doesn't say, you're being dramatic. Nature simply holds space. The way the soil holds a seed, patiently, without agenda, for as long as it takes. And this is the lesson the black-eyed Susan teaches us, not through words, but through existence. The bloom is not separate from the darkness. Look at her again. That black center isn't a flaw. It isn't something she hides or apologizes for. It's the foundation. The petals grow from it. The beauty radiates out of the darkness, not away from it. She doesn't bloom despite her dark center. She blooms around it. I'm not going to tell you to quit your job and live in a forest. I'm not going to pretend that one walk in the woods will undo years of emotional suppression. But I'm going to tell you this. The reconnection doesn't require a revolution. It requires a crack. Just like the seed only needs a fracture in the soil. Just like the flower only needs a sliver of light. You don't have to process everything at once. You don't have to unbury every emotion in a single afternoon. You just have to stop packing the soil tighter. Start small. Step outside without your phone for 10 minutes. Not to exercise, not to optimize, just to exist in the company of something that is alive and unhurried. Put your hands in soil, not because gardening is trendy, but because there's a bacterium in soil called Mycobacterium vaccae that activates serotonin neurons in your brain. The earth, literally, chemically, makes you feel better. The ground beneath your feet is an antidepressant that has been there your entire life, waiting for you to touch it. Sit with a plant. Watch it. Really watch it. Notice how it doesn't rush, how it doesn't apologize for growing slowly, how it doesn't compare itself to the plant beside it, how it simply turns toward the light and trusts the process. And when the emotions come, and they will come, let them. Let the tears fall like rain on dry soil. Let the anger crack through like a root splitting stone. Let the grief rise like a stem reaching for air it hasn't tasted in years. Because every emotion you've suppressed is not your enemy. It is a seed. And seeds, when they're finally given light and air and permission, they don't destroy you. They become the most beautiful part of you. There's a field somewhere. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's a metaphor. Maybe it's the space inside your chest that you've been afraid to visit. And in that field, everything you buried is still alive. Every word you swallowed, every tear you blinked away, every time you said "I'm fine" when you were drowning, every moment you chose silence because you were afraid that if you opened your mouth, everything would come pouring out and you'd never be able to put it back. It's all still there, not as wreckage, as seeds. The black-eyed Susan doesn't bloom because the world is gentle. She blooms because she carries something inside her that is stronger than the conditions around her. Something that survives fire, that endures drought, that waits in perfect, stubborn patience for the moment when the soil finally cracks open. And when it does, she doesn't bloom quietly. She blazes. So maybe, just maybe, what you've been calling your baggage, what you've been calling your damage, what you've been calling the parts of you that are too much, maybe those aren't your weaknesses. Maybe those are your black-eyed Susans. And maybe it's time to let them bloom. If this felt like something you needed to hear today, you're probably right. This channel, The Plant Mind, is a place where nature and the human heart meet, where we slow down, where we listen to what the earth has been trying to tell us all along. If that resonates with you, consider subscribing. Not for me, for the version of you that needs a place like this to exist. And if someone you love is carrying something heavy right now, something buried, maybe share this with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is remind them that what they're carrying isn't a burden. It's a seed. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.